top 10 lender in the country, guaranteed rate, has thrown up their hands waiting for the low interest rate environment to hit.
I think we've been through such a low volume environment for a while now. I read this as them saying, we think we're nearing the end of this cycle and positioning to take advantage of it.
We are sitting here with mortgage refinance demand dropping 18% month over month.
There's been a longer historical trend of reduction in appraiser population over a 10 and 20 year period when you zoom further out.
Episode 90 of the Market Moves podcast with Mark and Jeff, two uninteresting guys talking about interesting times. Jeff, you are a little more interesting today than I can represent. Where in the world are you coming from?
About the only thing I have to do that's interesting, Mark, is just be somewhere other than where I normally am, which what more bespeaks or kind of testifies to not being interesting. So we our family planned a trip. It's been years in the making and saving and planning process. I mean, I don't mean to come across as, we're just summering here or something, because that's definitely not the situation. But we've been planning a trip to Japan. So I'm sitting in Kyoto, Japan right now. There's about a 16-hour difference between you and I. So we've had to make sure the timing worked. I even had to rely on AI to make sure I knew what day and time it was for you because of the significant difference. So it's the end of your day. It's kind of an early start here for us, 6:30 a.m. At this point. But yeah, it's been really, really interesting. I mentioned this to you before, but it's really interesting to be in a place where you don't speak the primary language. There's just all sorts of uncomfortable challenges of how do I navigate the train system, the bus system, how do I order food at a restaurant when I go in. Even the way that some of the restaurants operate is not just sit down, here's a menu, tell me what you want. I mean, some do, but not everywhere does. So it's been kind of fun. A few takeaways have been, I think the $8 subscription for ChatGPT that my wife has planned this trip. I mean, it's been the travel agent, for the trip, and just constantly throughout the day, I'm at this bus stop. Or this train station? How do I get to the next place? Planning the itinerary, but then just a million questions in between. And we'll probably get into this a little bit with like AI topics, but the value add, for that, for the subscription has been incredible. It's one of those places where it's like, okay, I can see where AI really is meaningfully adding value at a very low cost, where, a lot of stuff to this point has been, novelty, kind of fun, interesting, but has it really helped me in day-to-day situations? It's getting to that point, but boy, this, navigating in a foreign country, foreign language has really, kind of highlighted the value of just the constant, endless, infinite patience with all of the questions and stuff that you ask. But it's really been useful from the initial planning through all of the troubleshooting. We had a typhoon that came through. We didn't know whether that was going to be disruptive to plans, but helped us come up with a plan B and C for trains and everything. Just been really, really insightful to see how useful it's been in that application.
Well, I've not been, but I've always admired the Japanese culture and really wanted to visit. And it seems like the exchange rates are great. It's a good time to be doing that now for whatever reason. But your travel has really required some sacrifice on my end here, Jeff. Recording at the end of a day instead of our customary beginning of a day. It's really, really testing my energy levels throughout the day one way or another. So I am here. I am with bells on, but it's taken quite a bit to get there.
Yeah, you're a little bit depleted throughout the day. I can tell, Mark. You're not the full caffeinated version of yourself, I think, as the first thing in the morning recording. It is for me, so maybe I'll have to carry the day as far as the energy levels and that sort of thing. But on behalf of me and Tug and the viewers, we appreciate your sacrifice.
Yeah, very good, man. Well, it'll be good to have you back. Great to see you and the family experiencing new things together and doing all of that out there.
Well, I appreciate it. I mean, we joke, but it's always a lift when somebody's gone and not there, pulling their weight. Generally, I feel that, to some extent, it really has been cool. I think you'd love the opportunity to come and check out the culture. Just a lot of interesting things. We got to do a whole podcast episode on that. We won't, but really interesting to see a lot of just the culture, very respectful, very clean, very organized. It's really been a lot of fun. And for whatever reason, most of my kids have had some affinity for the culture, whether it's through anime and, like some of the entertainment aspects, but my girls have been taking Japanese in high school as a language. And so it's been fun to see them dropped into the country where it's spoken. I mean, I had this experience living for 2 years in Argentina. I studied Spanish in high school and then, even in a training center for 2 months before, going into Argentina on a church mission. But you get to where the natives speak, and it's like, this is not what I learned in whatever the controlled, educational setting was. And my daughters have definitely had that experience. They're like, I can pick up words, but I don't think it's nearly as easy as they expected that it might be.
Well, yeah, incredible stuff. Can't wait to hear how the rest of the trip goes and your recap of it all on future episodes. Wanted to remind the listeners of our new newsletter podcast companion, Market Moves Weekly. Jeff, so far, one of the features of this, it will be just a quick hitting summary of the podcast, the topics and opinions that we share here on the podcast. But one of the cool features is that we are working with Tug to really drill down on at least one of the topics that we cover on the podcast, and asking Tug to write kind of an in-depth article going well beyond what we talk about here. We're calling it tugging at the thread. But this last week's article was on this trend that we've seen from NAR data, saying that single women being a really surprisingly high percentage of home buyers, and kind of going deep into that, the history of women in home buying, what those trends mean, where they're going, and all that sort of stuff. I'm surprised at the level that I've enjoyed reading those deep dives. The first newsletter, the topic was on these data centers, the water usage, and all the negative public sentiment that's out there. And we've seen there's been a lot of publicity on this topic since we talked about it a few weeks ago, and it was really nice to have some of this in-depth analysis from Tug. So I think it's one of the many nice kind of consequences that we've just sort of fallen into from the podcast and from our Open Claw agent, Tug, our podcast colleague. So more to come there. Would encourage you to subscribe to that newsletter. You'll see that in the show notes. It is on Beehive, so we'll help you get there. But subscribe to that if you can't listen to the podcast, or you just prefer to read a snapshot via an email in your inbox. We can do that.
Yeah, that's been one of the things that I've enjoyed, is having a brief summary of everything we talk about. I think, for somebody who either wants to pick out sections of the podcast or, get a brief summary, whether going into it or having listened to it, I like the summary breakdown. You and I went back and forth a little bit with Tug. I mean, we're doing our best to curate on the tugging at the thread deeper dive article to make sure that it's not just something that the first iteration that spits out or something. There were some conflicting data points. We did some research to make sure that it was as accurate as possible, but really interesting topics, from the data centers and the pushback there to this interesting trend of single women home buyers. We look forward to continuing to put those out. So it's been a lot of fun and interesting to see what can be done with the agents, like you say, Mark. It's we're certainly learning as we go, and it's kind of an open book as we do it, both with the podcast and now with the newsletter. So love people to check it out and give us any feedback they have.
Yeah, Jeff, I think we have gotten through the novelty of creating the Open Claw agent. We have been wowed by the capabilities at times, and I think we are really at the precipice of needing to generate sort of ROI, and that's a return on time investment. The way I look at it, there's not a whole lot of monetary investment, but the rubber really needs to meet the road with that effort there, and you see that sort of similar stories being talked about in business all around the country and world, where people are trying to implement this stuff, saying, okay, where are we really getting the return here? We're close. I mean, and I think we're getting some of it already, but I'm anxious to get to the next level.
You bet. Yeah, you bet, for sure. There's definitely been a lot of debates around are layoffs at big tech companies really the result of AI productivity yet or not? And it's kind of like the example I referenced to my wife and our travel agent, Chat GPT, who she's renamed Chet. That has been a real lift and value add. And I think, you're starting to see signs and maybe glimpses of where that can start to happen, whether it's in his podcast effort, business efforts, and that sort of thing. But you take for granted the internet, evolution, the mobile evolution. In hindsight, it seems like they happened overnight, and they certainly didn't. It took a while for them to evolve into what they ultimately became, and we're right in the middle of that process with the AI evolution right now.
Well, since we recorded a little more than a week ago, Jeff, there has been just a bevy of headlines and shocking sort of things one way or another. I think we are in a moment. There's a lot of artificial intelligence news and all of that, but not often do we have real estate headlines taking the forefront, either directly or indirectly. These days, truth is stranger than fiction most often, Jeff. So there is a couple of real head scratching, like in this world of like internet AI slop. I had to go look up both of these items that we're about to talk about here because I just simply couldn't believe that they were true or thought someone could very easily be pulling my leg. Kind of like if you remember when the International House of Pancakes rebranded to the International House of Burgers. That lasted for 4 or 5 days, and it's like there's just no way they flipped the P and it's now IHOB instead of IHOP. And that was just some sort of a marketing ploy. I thought for sure the next things we would talk about would be that. So first up on the list here, Jeff, top 10 lender in the country, guaranteed rate, has thrown up their hands waiting for the low interest rate environment to hit and has decided to open up a athleisure wear brand. This is competing with Lululemon, I guess, in sort of workout clothes for young people. Jeff, I don't know where to go here, but I don't know how to not talk about it.
It has to be a sign of the times and we've covered for a long time, we're at historically low transactions in terms of real estate sales and mortgages being originated. Guaranteed rate making this radical pivot is got to be a sign of the times, Mark. I'm not exactly sure how to read that otherwise. I will tell you, I don't plan personally to be running out and buying their branded clothing. Some of the people that I know that like to be in the fashion, it has not on their radar in this moment. So I don't know if this turns into a IHOB flop or not. It probably does. Maybe they're just hoping, hey, if we can't get loans from our mortgage officers, maybe we can at least sell them clothes or something. I mean, there's some level of creativity, and I think maybe points for that. Literally style points if they get this right. I don't know. It's just interesting and crazy. I mean, I didn't believe it initially either. So maybe this becomes the brand that takes the country by storm, Mark, and we're early on the topic again, but I don't know that I'm betting my money on it. We got to check and see if there's a poly market on this, actually. Does this thing succeed or not?
Oh boy. I gladly will throw my hat in the ring that for meaningful guaranteed rate appraisal volume, we will make Rate Fit, this athletic leisure brand, the official clothing of Acurity and the Market Moves podcast, where we are ready to sell our souls for this and to do our part to make it work. Frank, our friend of the podcast, Frank Luco, when talking about the difficulty of operating a business within the appraisal space and all these crazy regulations and how much they're changing and how much scrutiny and how much liability we operate within, has always said, if we were running a donut shop, it wouldn't be this hard. And this makes me think that guarantee rate waiting for rates to lower just said, you know what, let's go open our own version of a donut shop here and start this clothing brand. So I don't know, Jeff. I literally had to look it up. I was like, there's no way this is real. You see Rocket, you see UWM and Zillow and others trying to vertically integrate, and get in the entire customer experience process involving a home. This is I think this is a stretch. I see it as a stretch. So I'm not sure that the clothing will lead to more mortgages, but maybe it does. Maybe I'm just totally missing the boat, and I'm a curmudgeon old man that's looking at things way too traditionally.
Well, the both of those things may be true at the same time, Mark. I don't know, but maybe there's subtle genius behind it. I mean, if you've got babies growing up in onesies, with guaranteed rate branding, that maybe they're mortgage customers for life. It just takes 20 or 30 years or 40, based on the first time home buyers average age right now, years for that investment to pay off. But points for creativity, if nothing else. Yeah, it's just interesting, and then that's not the only interesting kind of weird thing going on out there, Mark.
So I think the next one, Jeff, is maybe weirder. I don't know. It's really hard to rate the level of weirdness in all of this, but we did see that the director of national intelligence resign because Tulsi Gabbard, I think her husband has some serious cancer, and so she's resigning, and President Trump is putting Bill Pulte, the director of federal housing and finance, into the acting director of national intelligence position. I think there were a number of people questioning whether or not he was had enough experience, I think, to step into FHFA. And what he has proven, no doubt, is an ability to kind of go after folks, within FHFA using the tools there. A lot of mortgage fraud claims. Really seems like a lot of it is based on claiming a home is your primary residence when it clearly is not. But really going after folks this way, and also seems to be, at least in public statements, seems to be extremely loyal to President Trump. So those are the qualities that I'm observing right now, and I think he's fairly bold and kind of willing to do bold things in the public eye. I've seen, obviously Trump likes to do that, but he seems to like to tie himself to an army of people that are willing to do that. It makes it kind of hard to contend with when folks are out there kind of saying and doing what has been considered pretty outrageous things, but with a straight face and proceed forward. So I don't know, Jeff. I mean, I had to look this up and make sure that this was a legitimate headline, and sure enough,
turns out it is. Now it's an acting position. I saw. I think it's is it 180-day limit on it, or there's a limitation on how long he can be there. My assumption is that they're looking for an actual permanent replacement. It's one of those things, Mark. I don't know how much to read into it. I see people get so caught up in a lot of what happens at the national level that for most of us that may or may not actually affect us. What the qualifications are for this role, I have no idea. I certainly understand that criticism that he's what in his background leads you to expect that's the a qualifying role for him to fill. So I don't know. It's the sign of the times of just craziness that's that's out there and that's happening. I guess we'll see if it leads to any meaningful actions or not. But to your point, there's definitely been bold statements, bold efforts taken. One of the Fed presidents, I think, was in the hot seat for it's one of the things that Bill was alleging was what you cited. The claiming a primary residence to get a better mortgage rate. On something that was questionable whether it was or not. An intelligence director, certainly the access to all sorts of information. I don't know what comes of it. There are people, some people concerned, and probably rightfully so. I think Trump has been on the receiving end of lawfare to some extent. The concern is does he turn around to do the same thing he's complained about through some of these positions that he's filling. So something to watch in some regard, but certainly out of left field as far as this appointment went. So it's who knows.
It does seem that I think this. I don't know. I mean, I think it does maybe signify a vote of confidence in the direction that FHFA has been going. Right. So that's something to watch pretty seriously, because we had these series of executive orders that are directly or indirectly tied to FHFA and their directions on Fannie and Freddie and the mortgage market and appraisal, with kind of an attaboy to the GSEs, in all of the different things that they're doing, modernizing the mortgage process, but with additional direction too, to make appraisal industry more accessible, as we're losing appraisers and and not enough appraisals for appraisers and all that sort of stuff. So, but I think the Pulte thing, it avoids Senate confirmation because he's already been confirmed for a position in the acting thing, and just do it immediately. So I think it was only maybe 2 or 3 handfuls of people that were possible candidates. So, I think that explains some of it, but my goodness, it doesn't feel like life has prepared him for that role just yet here. So learn on the job, right? Anyway. All right. Maybe a little bit more serious and impactful headlines, Jeff. Berkshire Hathaway is expanding its reach into housing, buying all cash deal of $8.5 billion, Taylor Morrison. I think there was like some 25 or 30% premium in the offer that was coming across. What do you make of this deal?
Yeah, this one was interesting. I think insightful, at least from my perspective. There has been a transition from Warren Buffett leading Berkshire, for years and years with Charlie Munger. Obviously, Charlie's passed, and Warren's finally stepping back. So this is, I think I saw, one of maybe the first big acquisition, that wasn't directly led by him. But historically, Berkshire's been very good at positioning well for things that are coming. I think Warren historically has really been good at stockpiling cash. This mantra of be greedy when everybody's conservative and be conservative when everybody's greedy. And right now, there's been an ongoing theme. Transactions are really, really low. That they're positioning themselves in the home building market in particular, I think is a sign that they see the market recovering. And I don't know that it necessarily means they see it recovering next month or maybe even this year, but within the next year or two, I think they're positioning to be able to take advantage of that. And so, I mean, that's my take on this. I think we've been through such a low volume environment for a while now. I read this as them saying we think we're nearing the end of this cycle and positioning to take advantage of it.
Yeah, I was listening to an interview with Bill Ackman today that was just talking about the market generally, and he was talking about really important companies like Microsoft and Meta and Amazon that he thinks are undervalued right now because everybody is enamored with the next best great thing, which is chip stocks and storage and electricity and all this sort of stuff. And it's like, well, what about these huge cash engines that are out there? And it strikes me that people may be taking their eye off the ball with more traditional brick and mortar, atoms, kind of moving atoms companies like what a builder would do. But I also think that it really speaks to a bet on housing over the next 5+ years, considering where it is today. And you see a lot of strategy ongoing right now in and around housing, mortgage, appraisal, all of these things. I mean, there is moving and shaking. There's appraisal management companies buying appraisal management companies. There's all sorts of folks talking to all sorts of other folks about more acquisition. There's lenders consolidating. There are lenders trying to get fully integrated in the vertical stack, like Rocket, like Zillow, like others. And Berkshire's got its own unique vertical integration here. It isn't really surrounded by mortgage necessarily. It's really surrounded by building. And I think that's interesting. I mean, they own a large insulation company. They own a building software company. They own a manufactured home company, which I think is maybe a direction that modernization in building is going. And they add this, which is maybe a combination of high end and lower end product from Taylor Morrison with national reach, some mortgage angle, title angles, and I think preparing for a big building spree that I think the government is going to be pushing, at least as over the next 3 years with Trump's stated plans in place. I read somewhere that some 4 million undersupplied American home inventory exists. And I think there's a lot of folks that disagree with a statement like that, whatever the number is, whether it's 1 million, 500,000, or oversupplied, right? There's people that all across the spectrum. But I've been doing been in appraisal for 2.5 decades now, and it's been clear to. I mean, we stopped building after the great financial crisis entirely. I mean, there were no lending dollars available for builders and developers to develop land. And it just stopped for not quite a decade, but dang near close. And as we headed into COVID, we were really not making up any ground. We started building again, but we were not making up any lost ground over those 10 years where we stopped building. And of course, now that we've been in COVID, I mean, we're building some inventory over the last bit. We've talked a lot about this on the podcast, but none of this is making up for the problems that I think we have. And so this seems like a bet on an intention countrywide to build a lot of American housing inventory, in Berkshire kind of making one of their first bets with Greg Abel at the helm and not Warren Buffett. And, I see the logic, and it sort of feels like a play out of the Berkshire Hathaway playbook.
I think it really does, Mark. And, they've been pretty good at projecting and forecasting, where the market is heading with many of these acquisitions that they've done. And so I think that's, exactly right. I remember through the great financial crisis having appraised whole subdivisions, JOLTS, that then got foreclosed by the bank. And every 6 months, the bank's coming back saying, what's it worth now? What's it worth now? And the value is going down, every in 6-month increments, because nobody was buying lots. Nobody could get the financing to build. And so, having lived that firsthand, it was so risky. It was almost impossible to get subdivision development financing for a long time. And so that's been compounded by this lock-in effect that we've talked about, where so many current home buyers are unwilling to part with their 3% mortgage rate. And so, we've had this confluence of factors taking place that says, certainly there's been a need for housing inventory. And I think that, Berkshire's reading this as far as the timing to actually start to, be prepped for it. You've got a paint company, I think, as well, that we had looked at. So it's just, it's interesting. Their philosophy is buy great companies that have great management. It's not, necessarily vertically integrate everything that we go into, but, seeing this as a vote of, I think, the leadership and management in Taylor Morrison, as well as the timing of something to go into for the market. It's this survive till 25 and whatever we're doing through 26, it seems like the actual recovery, is continually this light at the end of the tunnel that keeps moving further and further ahead. But in my mind, it's pretty clear that it's going to come. Like, there's going to be a return to historical norms as far as number of homes being built, number of mortgages being given, number of homes being purchased and sold. Yeah, but and there's been kind of a winnowing effect of companies that have struggled to keep up with in any of these industries, appraisal, mortgage, builders. But those that are able to weather this storm are going to be in a good position whenever the time comes that we actually see, the transaction volumes pick back up to historical norms, maybe even busy times again. But this feast or famine is really hard to endure. And I just read this as another one of the green shoots in the market that, I think that there really will be a recovery. It's just, it doesn't always feel like that when you're going through the pain of, it being as slow as it ever has been.
You've got someone like Rocket with what I think is the Redfin. I would say it was Redfin, I think, and Mr. Cooper and all of that. But really from the first thought of home ownership to refinancing the third or fourth time in that home, or helping you get into your third or fourth house, they're really trying to control that entire vertical stack. Berkshire, kind of from dirt to drywall to solving the affordability crisis. I think it's just a different type of vertical stack play that's much more builder oriented. Jeff, I don't know if we said this on the podcast last week, but someone had postured that I had read, I think that land, real estate in the age of abundance that maybe all this AI is going to bring us is probably going to be quite valuable and become more valuable. But the actual buildings out there, as they become cheaper to build, if we truly do have like a robotic arm or some modernization, in kind of typical Berkshire strategy. They just say, yeah, screw all that. We're going to bet that it's really not going to make that kind of an impact.
That's exactly right. And even if it does, that doesn't seem like it's right around the corner. I mean, you've had 3D printed homes, and frankly, you've had manufactured homes for a long time. None of that has really turned the market on its head as far as revolutionizing the way that homes are being built. And even if there is a revolution, aren't you better off owning a Taylor Morrison that can integrate whatever the technology is, robots building on site? Maybe there's some synergies between the manufactured, the Clayton homes that they had acquired previously and the Taylor Morrison on site, stick built construction. Is there some way to merge the two, or have a hybrid that's more efficient, more cost effective? I don't know if they have grand strategies, or plans along those lines or not. But even if there is an evolution, take a great company now and then help it evolve into the future is seems to maybe be the play here. So whether home building continues, as is for the next 5 to 10 years and beyond or not, they're definitely positioned to say, however it's built, there's going to be demand for the building to take place, and they're positioning, to be able to take advantage of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting stuff. Just another good American business being acquired. Interesting. I mean, I think they got up to a stock price of 74 a share. They were roughly 54, 56 when purchased, but they were just at 74 and never really been. And that was just for a second. It's shot up to 71% as they have offered the premium on top of acquisition. So not a huge discount as far as I can tell. It feels like more than anything a bet on a trend that's coming here. So, in similar news, we won't spend as much time, Jeff, talking about it, but CoStar bought Zonda. Zonda is one of the preeminent new construction kind of neighborhood data sources. Compiling. They sell some new construction neighborhood software. They have really good data on lots being developed and being turned over to builders and builders completing and all that sort of stuff. So CoStar is really trying to get into diversify from the commercial real estate into the residential real estate with homes.com. They had gotten into apartments.com. They bought. They're really trying to grow through acquisition. Boy, I am personal friends with a guy that manages some meaningful money that has been an enormous fan of Andy Florence, the CEO of CoStar, watching everything he's done. That dang stock has gone from low 90s to $30 a share as it sits right now. It's 60% down, and they're trying to acquire their way in here, Jeff, and we'll see if that works.
Yeah, we will indeed. One of the things that emphasizes to me, Mark, is there is just value in the data, in understanding what's happening in the market. And so it's, interesting play, interesting to see what the stock trajectory has been over time, but we'll continue to watch that and see, where that company goes. But another one of those, like you say, acquisitions, just movement taking place in the market right now. Story.
With all of this, Jeff, we are, as I said before, there just is a lot of posturing and strategy going on behind the scenes. I certainly see it in our line of work. People are waiting. People are expecting. Some like guarantee rates say, you know what, maybe I should diversify some way here with opening a clothing line. But it feels like the low interest rate environment is around the corner. I think people generally expect that we're not going to be in this Iran conflict into 2027, and that when as soon as the conditions on the field are right, we will get some meaningful rate drops, and then we're off to the races. What we've been waiting for a while, and what tells me people are actually believing that on some level is that they are, kind of developing corporate strategy for such in a way that they haven't done this for the last 3 years. All the while, we are sitting here with mortgage refinance demand dropping 18% month over month, Jeff. And I don't know, hands in the air. Just I don't know what to do with all of this other than whatever Tug's saying was. For 2027, I guess that's what we're looking at.
Yeah, I'll have to go bring that one back, because that maybe it is. Although my take on this, Mark, is that because of the conflict in Iran, the interest rates have gone up. And so I'm not surprised to see a short-term data point like this, mortgage demand dropping 18% month over month. the rates hit the highest level since August of last year. And, it just speaks to me that the market is ready to transact, but it is very price sensitive and very price sensitive to interest rates specifically. It makes no sense to refinance when rates aren't any better than where you bought a couple of years ago. And as they started coming down, and as we tipped under 6% for just a second, I mean, we saw a lot of refinancing taking place, and for it wasn't very long, but it was like, man, we're seeing way more refis than we had in a long time. A lot of what the appraisal work has been purchase transactions, because that's the only thing that's really been taking place at a meaningful level. My hope is that we can find a pathway to the lower interest rates that you're talking about sooner than later, because every time the rates get even just somewhat better, we see the market react pretty quickly with increase in mortgage applications and appraisals in overall purchase transactions. All of that stuff spikes pretty quickly, and to me, it speaks to the challenges of affordability. And as soon as there's any relief on the affordability front, the volume really follows suit. But when interest rates go back up, it just pumps the brakes on everything.
Yeah, and God, they do it so unexpectedly. This was a little bit out of nowhere, as this energy crisis sort of was born out of the Iran conflict. It was born out of no one expecting it. So we're just dealing with this all the while, Jeff. We've got inflation, printing at 4.2, expected maybe 4.9%. We have energy prices, kind of through the roof. We have general concern about these sorts of things. But at the same time, the job openings report, the JOLTS report, expected to be at 6.88 million, came in at 7.68 million. This is an enormous increase in job openings, which indicates more active hiring out there than expected by the to the tune of 15-18% or so, right? At 12, I don't know what the actual percentage is, but I mean, it's a lot, and it's surprising on some level to see these sorts of things. A lot of people say, oh boy, if you were looking for rates to drop at some point, turn away from this number in this print, because this is reason to not do anything with rates, if not rise them. So what do you think?
Yeah, well, I think that's the Fed's mentality is, if I've got inflation concerns and if the economy and if employment is stable, that tends to higher interest rates, not lower interest rates. And so, the question with it, anytime you get a data point like this is it a trend or is it a blip on the radar? And, I mean, you referenced CoStar stock price. Anytime you look at the history of a stock price, it's bumpy. It goes, up and down. And so is this a bumpy data point, or is this signaling a trend? I think, that there's not an optimistic outlook for rates long-term if we have persistent price pressures on the inflation side, and if jobs and the economy are very strong. It's going to be hard to, I think, at least for the Fed to cut their, short-term lending rates as quickly as they would like or have been planning to. I don't know that this necessarily is going to hold in the long term. I see conflicting data points, and I've definitely talked to people, and this is just anecdotally, but who have been applying for jobs, and they're competing against hundreds of applications for a single job. And so not all of the data is singing the same song necessarily in my mind, Mark, but my hope is that we're not in a situation where we have really high inflation pressure and very strong job numbers for a long period of time, because that is I think going to lead us to holding rates close to where they are now, and maybe even higher. I'm not sure that that's where we're going to end up, but that tends to be the Fed's outlook on it.
Just sort of anecdotal, and I am obviously armchair economist here, and got hardly any idea what I'm talking about, but I do have a podcast, and that's got to stand for something, Jeff. But my initial reaction to job openings being more hot than what's expected, I think a couple of things. I think there is a lot of manufacturing investment dollars coming into the U.S. that has been planned for over 12 months now. It would make sense that some of that is starting to hit. We have a lot of data center kind of build out and that sort of thing. So, 50% of them, as we've talked about, are getting poo-pooed, but you still got a lot being built. As much as we talk about, the world losing their job because of AI, I don't really think that's where we are today. I mean, I definitely have seen a lot of layoffs and people talking about that. I think Meta was the most recent like headline getting one that was 8,000 people or something like that. And all these people are sort of blaming AI for their layoffs. I think it was probably overemployment. There was like a lot of these computer companies, tech companies had employed people so that no one else would, and they had a lot of extra dollars to do that sort of thing. And so the chickens have come home to roost there, and there's a way to kind of optimize. So I think they're taking that chance, and there's a good opportunity to blame AI, and everybody sort of buys it and just moves on. But Jeff, so those kind of make the headlines and like really itch the fear nerve there that everybody kind of likes to get at. But what I think is happening is a bit of a revolution in the coding element that AI is bringing here. And so now you've got all sorts of folks that can build things that they've never thought they could build before. And so I think there's a lot of excitement. We talked about the AI vampire, last week, where people are just so pumped about what they can do with these new tools that they can't sleep. They just want to go and go. And you and I have experienced a little bit of that. And so the law firm that never had a computer programmer, as an example, is now looking to hire folks because there's just things they could build that they never thought they could. And so I think there's a little bit or a lot bit of that going on. There's just a little bit of excitement about what can be with some of the tools that are available here. Thought too good to be true early on, not seeming to be at this point. And I think we've had enough time pass that folks are starting to act on it.
I think that's exactly right. And the question anytime there's a big layoff is that job really gone from the economy generally, or is it a job that's available somewhere else? And some of the stats I've seen are that there's lots of job postings and demand for the software coding and engineers. So those that are getting let go at Meta and some of the other big tech firms that have had some from the overstaffing. And I mean, it's hard to keep all the historical context fresh in your mind, but when you think back to COVID, they were hiring like crazy and hoarding talent and had the cash to do so. Now they're optimizing, like you say, for I think profitability over just revenue and growth at all costs. But I don't know that many of those jobs are actually being eliminated in the economy as you would measure, GDP or something. And I think they're being redeployed in other settings. Some of those starting new businesses and pursuing ideas that they have. But like you say, some of those going to firms and in areas in the economy that might not have been in the market to hire coders and programmers and that sort of thing. When you just step back and think about what you would love to have if you could do it at a cost-effective way that hasn't historically been possible, but is today, make your own motor management system, make your own, software for whatever you do, in our space, writing appraisal reports or whatever else. That's not to say that you're going to go do all of that. And there may be reasons that it doesn't make sense to do it. But when the cost comes down dramatically to create your own bespoke or customized software, there's some value and benefit to being able to do that. And it's finding the right strategy, of course. But, I think we're seeing a real reshuffling of what people are seeing as possible, hiring other people as well as these agentic coding options that are available where, less sophisticated people like you and I can do things that we just never would have been able to do in the past with the tools that are coming out. And man, it's hard to keep on the bleeding edge, but I see, all of these frontier models, I think really leaning into this agentic aspect of making it a lot easier than what it has been, even just within the last few months to spin up an OpenClaw agent. It's becoming more integrated into their base, offerings, from chat to Grok. I saw it when I logged in today, I think, Mark, and you've probably seen this, a Grok offering, copy this code, put it into your terminal, and we'll help you get an agent spun up, right away. There's just a lot of these things are going to lead to people doing their own, programming and software writing that just never would have made sense, pre-AI.
I would venture to guess that maybe a million of these job openings are also companies hiring people to unwind whatever they've set up with Claude. And well, we had $500 million in monthly expense to Claude by one company. My goodness.
Yeah.
We all got a little excited, I think, or many did. So there we are. And topic that we had to cover today is professional licensure in real estate. It's not a pretty picture, maybe not fully surprising, but I think you see the numbers. It's a little more surprising than I would have expected. What do we see there?
Yeah. So I was listening to saw an article from the Wall Street Journal that was talking about a drop in National Association of Realtor NAR membership. Peaked in 2022, mark at about 1.6 million. I consistently hear them referenced as the largest trade organization in the country, and I think that's probably right, if not certainly one of, by total membership. But the article was talking about them having dropped from their peak in 2022, 1.6 million down to 1.45 million, call it. So, about a 9.5% reduction in total membership. And so I got thinking, well, that's interesting. I wonder how that over that same time period, how does the appraiser population change? And this is based on licenses for, registered with the ASC, but there's different ways of measuring that. Actively submitting to Fannie and Freddie portals is a different number and data set than what is showing here. But a reduction of 70,000 unique licenses registered with the ASC of appraisers down to 66,700, about a 4.5% drop over that same 3-year period of time. There's been a longer historical trend of reduction in appraiser population over a 10 and 20-year period when you zoom further out. But in some ways, Mark, maybe not surprising that become a real estate agent doesn't take as much time or investment as it does to become an appraiser. Those that come into the market when it's busy are maybe more likely or willing to let the license go when it's less busy. Really, this is just speaking to the fact that from 2022 through today, it's been less busy, and you've had professionals dropping out of the space at about over double the rate on the realtor side, even as what was on the appraiser side. And a data point that stood out to me, but definitely on topic with what we've been addressing here, that we're still in historical low times, post COVID bump and zero interest rate policy bump. We'll get back to it again, but the membership in NAR definitely tracks with the trends we've been seeing.
Jeff, this chart goes through what I presume is the end of 2025. We're halfway through 2026, and I have a feeling it's been particularly painful for a good percentage of these professionals, both the realtor side and the appraiser side. It's like, okay, I had enough wherewithal to get through this little bit, but rates getting back up to 6.6, and this never-ending war, the interest rate drop that never is. I think it's hurting a lot of people, and so I bet these numbers are even lower today.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. There's no reason to think the trend hasn't continued and maybe even been exaggerated, like you're suggesting, just based on what interest rates have done in the last few months. And so, it's telling the story of where we're at. It will crater and recover again. Timing the market. I mean, even the best, stock traders say, timing the market is kind of a fool's errand. And I think, there are just so many convergent factors that play into what are interest rates going to do, and on and on. It's hard to time it exactly right. But when I see some of the smartest players out there, like a Berkshire, making significant investments, it tells me that, we're still not in recovery mode yet, but are going to be at some point, and smart people are positioning for it. So I'm not one to totally turn a blind eye to that.
Well, Jeff, I've enjoyed this recording with a Japan edition here. We had a lot of interesting headlines. It feels like there are more building for us to be covering next week. I am really anxious to kind of take on a maybe even a multi-episode topic of kind of the future of appraisal in all of this. It feels like it's getting to be a pretty good time to check in, to UAD 3.6, are appraisers going to be needed? What's happening in the foreclosure world? Are these people using appraisers in the same way? What does AI mean for us, and all of that? I know we talk about those things quite a bit, but with what feels like a strategic planning going on in a lot of different spaces, that it would be a good time to check in and see where we are.
Yeah, I definitely look forward to that. Then there's a lot of information, out there. I think a lot of different ways that we can analyze, where that's at specifically. Anecdotally, it's interesting. I was in the train station waiting to catch a train and had somebody, call me looking for an appraisal supervisor. So I had a good conversation with him. It called 20 or 30 appraisers that day, nobody willing to take him on as a supervisor, everybody citing being too slow, not having enough work to bring somebody else on. And I told him, well, the problem is when things are really busy, they cite the exact opposite reason. I'm too busy to take somebody on and train, but was able to reference him to, some of the alternative pathways to gain that experience, PREA and practicum, which are things we've talked about here. So there are a lot of different aspects I think that we can analyze, for the future of appraisal. I know that the Appraisal Foundation has put out a recent document that's, I think, starting to be circulated through some of their councils and organizations as well, that has some interesting data points. So I think it'd be a very interesting, whether single episode or multi-episode topic. There's a lot of change happening at once, and I think we're doing our best we can to keep up with it.
Yeah, it feels like this is an ongoing kind of active conversation in real estate circles, and I'll be interested to dive in and put in our 2 cents, but also talk to folks that are thinking about this deeply and see what they think.
Well, talking to smarter people than us has usually been a good strategy for us, Mark. So we'll seek those out. There's a lot of options to go there, but definitely look forward to it. I think timely, like you say. So we'll have a good time diving in on that one.
Very good. Well, check out the podcast companion newsletter that we are putting together. We will have a link in the show notes. Like and subscribe to the podcast here. It would help us to spread the word. And till next time, and episode 91, Jeff.
Looking forward to it. Thanks, Mark.
Safe travel.